We're the Straw Hat Pirates, and the Gren Line is calling. We will find the One Piece.
I simply cannot contain my excitement to dive into episode 2. I'll be back with my thoughts shortly. Alright, I've just wrapped up episode 2, and I am still absolutely captivated by what this season has to offer. Now there is a notably significant departure from what unfolds in the source material, but I genuinely believe it translates beautifully on screen. And truthfully, I have a deep appreciation for when a live-action adaptation takes the core events of the manga and breathes its own creative spirit into them, rather than mechanically recreating every single story beat. When the first season attempted that more faithful paint-by-numbers approach, it fell somewhat short, and understandably so, because the manga itself is extraordinarily compelling. Putting a fresh, inventive spin on the narrative is actually a far more effective way to both serve a general audience experiencing this story through the lens of a Netflix production and simultaneously keep it exhilarating for devoted longtime fans who already know exactly where the journey leads. What truly moved me, however, was a particular moment, a magnificent full-circle celebration of everything One Piece represents, reaching far beyond the Twin Capes arc. It's the kind of profound, layered storytelling that could never have existed in the manga at this stage, simply because Oda himself doesn't possess the gift of foresight. He couldn't have planted that seed back then. There is a scene involving Luffy that genuinely brought me to tears, which honestly surprised me, because nothing in the first season stirred that kind of deep emotional response in me regarding Luffy's character or his growth. But here, it completely wrecked me, in the most wonderful, joyful way imaginable. This episode also sets into motion the Marine subplot, much like Season 1 did with Koby, Helmeppo, and Garp. I know that storyline drew mixed reactions, particularly around the early revelation of Garp's connection to Luffy. There are some comparable creative liberties taken here in Season 2, though nothing quite as seismic as that bombshell, and I genuinely feel these adjustments make the overarching narrative far more cohesive and satisfying as a whole. On top of all that, I am absolutely enchanted by Tashigi in this live-action rendition. Julia Rebel is delivering a phenomenal performance, breathing remarkable life into this character. And given that Tashigi's arc throughout the Alabasta saga stands as one of the most emotionally resonant highlights of that entire storyline for me personally, it is deeply gratifying to see the show investing so much attention into her journey. And once again, Zoro feels refreshingly different here. He's shed the relentlessly brooding, too cool for everything energy that defined him in Season 1. He's the subject of jokes, he lands his own comedic moments that go beyond just projecting quiet intensity, and the timing of the humor across this season feels vastly more natural and earned. While some of the comedy in Season 1 carried that broad, somewhat generic quality, the kind of humor one might associate with Marvel's cinematic style, the jokes here feel genuinely rooted in who these characters actually are. There were two particular moments between Zoro and Nami that had me laughing out loud, and I'm tremendously eager to see how that dynamic continues to develop. Humor, after all, is an enormous pillar of One Piece. Yes, it's an action saga, an adventure epic layered with rich political and philosophical themes, but it is equally a story filled with outrageous, heartfelt gags. The fact that both the writers and the actors so clearly understand the souls of the characters they're crafting makes everything flow with a warmth and authenticity that is truly a joy to witness. Here's your hook and first section. Something happened in One Piece Live Action Season 2 Episode 2 that left me completely frozen in my seat, and I am not exaggerating when I say this single episode has the power to change the way you look at this entire adaptation forever. There is a moment in this episode so unexpectedly powerful, so emotionally charged, that it does something even the manga, with all its brilliance, all its decades of storytelling, simply could not do. And when it hit me, I did not see it coming, not even close. This is not just another episode of a Netflix show trying to recreate something fans already love. This is something entirely different. This is One Piece doing what One Piece has always done best, making you feel things you never expected to feel, at a moment you never expected to feel them. So if you think you already know what Episode 2 has in store just because you have read the manga, just because you followed the trailers, just because you consider yourself a die-hard fan who has seen it all, I am telling you right now, you do not, because Episode 2 just changed everything. And we are about to break down exactly how. Going into Episode 2 of One Piece Live Action Season 2, expectations were already running extraordinarily high. Episode 1 had done a remarkable job of re-establishing the world, reintroducing the Straw Hats, and reminding both casual viewers and devoted manga readers exactly why this story has captured the hearts of hundreds of millions of people across the globe for over 2 decades. But episode 1, as strong as it was, felt in many ways like a foundation, a carefully constructed launch pad designed to send episode 2 soaring into territory that would genuinely surprise people. And that is precisely what happened. What episode 2 delivered was not simply a continuation of the story. It was a statement. A bold, confident, creatively daring statement that said loudly and without apology that this live-action adaptation is no longer content with simply following in the footsteps of the source material. It has found its own voice, and that voice is powerful. Now let's be clear about something important right from the start. There are changes in this episode, significant changes from what happens in the manga at this point in the story. And if you are the kind of fan who believes that any deviation from the source material is automatically a betrayal, then episode 2 is going to challenge that belief in the most compelling way possible. Because these are not careless changes. These are not the result of writers who do not understand or respect the original story. Quite the opposite. These feel like the decisions of people who understand One Piece so deeply, so intimately, that they recognized which moments needed to be reimagined to land with the full emotional weight they deserve when translated into a completely different medium for a completely different kind of audience. There is a fundamental truth about adaptation that too many fans resist acknowledging, and it is this: what works magnificently on the printed page of a manga does not always translate with equal power to a live-action screen. The pacing is different, the visual language is different. The way an audience connects with a character in a 60-page chapter versus a 45-minute episode is fundamentally, profoundly different. And the creative team behind One Piece Live Action Season 2 understands this with a clarity that was not always evident in the first season. Season 1, for all its genuine strengths and moments of brilliance, occasionally stumbled precisely because it leaned too heavily on recreating the manga beat for beat. There were stretches where it felt less like a living, breathing television production and more like an extremely expensive, extremely earnest attempt to animate still panels with real human beings. And the result at times was a strange kind of flatness, moments that should have crackled with tension or humor or emotional resonance instead landing with a slightly muted thud, because the approach that made them extraordinary in the manga simply did not carry over intact. Episode 2 of Season 2 demonstrates with remarkable confidence and skill that the team has learned from those moments. They have figured out something genuinely difficult and genuinely important: how to honor the soul of Oda's vision while simultaneously reinventing the specific execution of that vision in ways that serve the new medium. And the result is an episode that feels both deeply familiar and startlingly fresh at the same time. The trailer for Season 2 had already hinted at some of these changes, of course. Sharp-eyed fans had noticed certain scenes, certain character placements, certain dialogue fragments that did not quite align with their memories of the Alabasta Saga's opening movements. There was speculation, there was debate, there was the usual mixture of cautious optimism and protective anxiety that tends to surround any major adaptation of beloved source material. But nothing in those trailers fully prepared viewers for the emotional and narrative ambition that Episode 2 brings to the screen. Because the biggest change, the one that matters most, the one that genuinely shifts something fundamental about how this story feels in its live-action form, is not something that could be easily spotted in a 2-minute trailer. It is something that only lands with its full, devastating, glorious impact when you are sitting there watching it unfold in real time, completely unprepared for what is about to happen to you emotionally. And that, more than anything else, is what makes Episode 2 so extraordinary. It earns its surprises, every single one of them. What is especially striking about the way Episode 2 sets itself up is how deceptively calm its opening movements feel. There is a deliberate, almost patient quality to the early scenes, a sense of the story taking its time, letting you settle in, letting you feel comfortable and oriented, and perhaps even slightly ahead of what you think is coming. This is not accidental. This is expert narrative construction, the kind that understands the value of contrast, the power of lulling an audience into a sense of security before pulling the ground out from under them. Because when the episode shifts, and it does shift, suddenly and completely, and with breathtaking emotional force, the impact is multiplied tenfold by that earlier sense of calm. You are not braced for it. You cannot be braced for it. And that vulnerability, that openness, is exactly what allows the episode's most extraordinary moments to reach into your chest and squeeze with both hands. This is One Piece live action operating at a level that frankly many people, including some of its most enthusiastic supporters, did not fully believe it was capable of reaching. Episode 2 is the moment this adaptation stops being a promising experiment and becomes something genuinely, undeniably special. Let's talk about the changes. Because this is where Episode 2 gets genuinely fascinating and genuinely brave. Anyone who has read the manga knows that this particular stretch of the One Piece story, the early movements of the Alabasta saga, the Twin Capes arc, the introduction of certain pivotal characters and plot threads, follows a fairly specific and well-established sequence of events. Oda constructed it with the kind of careful, purposeful architecture that defines his best work, and for years fans have held those events close, treating them almost like sacred text. So when the live action begins moving pieces around the board in ways that diverge from that established sequence, the instinctive reaction for many viewers is resistance. A kind of defensive tightening, a quiet voice in the back of the mind whispering they are going to ruin this. They are going to take something perfect and sand down its edges until it becomes something unrecognizable. But here is what episode 2 proves. With patience and confidence and an almost disarming gentleness, that voice is wrong. Not just slightly wrong. Completely, fundamentally, beautifully wrong. The changes made in episode 2 are not the changes of a creative team that does not understand or respect the source material. They are the changes of a creative team that understands it so thoroughly, so completely, that they have identified which specific elements carry the emotional and narrative weight of the story and then found new, sometimes more powerful ways to deliver that weight within the particular constraints and possibilities of their medium. This is a crucial distinction that is worth sitting with for a moment, because it reframes the entire conversation about adaptation fidelity. The question was never supposed to be, does this match the manga panel for panel? The question was always supposed to be, does this capture what the manga made you feel? Does it honor the spirit, the heart, the fundamental truth of what Oda was building? And judged by that standard, the changes in episode 2 do not diminish the story. In several genuinely surprising ways, they actually deepen it. Take, for instance, the way the episode handles the marine subplot. Now, this is an area where Season 1 drew some of its most pointed criticism. The decision to introduce Garp's relationship to Luffy so early in the series, a revelation that in the manga does not land until much later, was a gamble that divided the fanbase sharply. Some viewers appreciated the dramatic irony it created, the added layer of tension it brought to the marine storyline. Others felt it robbed a genuinely iconic reveal of its proper moment, deflating something that should have been a thunderbolt into something that arrived too early to land with full force. It is a fair debate, and the people on both sides of it have legitimate points. But what is interesting about Season 2 is the way it seems to have absorbed that feedback and used it to approach its own structural decisions with noticeably more care and nuance. The marine plot in Episode 2 takes similar liberties. It moves certain things earlier, repositions certain characters relative to where they appear in the manga timeline, but it does so in a way that feels considerably more measured, considerably more conscious of the balance between revelation and restraint. The changes here do not feel like they are stealing future moments from the story. They feel like they are constructing a more coherent, more dramatically satisfying present moment, one that serves the specific needs of a television audience experiencing this narrative in weekly or binge-watch installments rather than monthly manga chapters. And then there is Tashigi. If the marine subplot represents the episode's most structurally significant departure from the source material, then Tashigi represents its most emotionally rewarding one. Julia Rebel's performance in this role has been one of the most quietly consistent pleasures of this entire live-action project, and Episode 2 gives her more room to breathe, more space to inhabit the full complexity of this character than anything we saw in the first season. For fans who love Tashigi's arc in the Alabasta saga, and there are many of us, because it is genuinely one of the most compelling character journeys in that entire stretch of the story. Watching the live action invest this heavily in her presence and her development, this early in the season is deeply, genuinely gratifying. There is a quality to Rebel's portrayal that goes beyond simple physical resemblance or competent line delivery. She has found something real and specific in this character, a particular kind of quiet intensity. A simmering internal conflict between duty and conscience and personal conviction that makes every scene she appears in feel charged with unspoken meaning. And the changes the writers have made to accommodate a more prominent Tashigi presence in these early episodes do not feel forced or artificially inflated. They feel organic. They feel like the story naturally expanding to include someone who deserves to be seen. What is perhaps most impressive about the way Episode 2 handles its departures from the source material is the underlying coherence they create for the season as a whole. One of the subtle but persistent weaknesses of certain stretches of One Piece live-action Season 1 was a feeling of slight narrative fragmentation, individual scenes and sequences that worked beautifully in isolation, but did not always connect into a fully unified, dramatically propulsive whole. The plot sometimes felt like it was moving from landmark to landmark, checking off the manga's greatest hits rather than building towards something with its own organic momentum. Episode 2 of Season 2 suggests quite powerfully that this problem has been addressed at a fundamental level. The changes made here are not random or isolated. They are clearly part of a deliberate, carefully considered strategy to construct a season-long narrative that has its own internal logic, its own dramatic architecture, its own sense of building inevitably toward a climax that will feel both surprising and completely earned. Every departure from the manga in this episode feels like it is in service of that larger goal, and when you step back and look at the shape of what is being constructed, it is genuinely exciting. This is a creative team that is no longer just adapting One Piece. They are building something that stands alongside the manga rather than merely beneath it, something that earns its place in the broader One Piece universe on its own remarkable terms. There are moments in storytelling that transcend the medium they exist in, moments that reach across the screen, or the page, or the stage, and touch something so fundamental, so universally human, that the distinctions between fiction and reality momentarily dissolve, and you are left sitting there completely vulnerable, completely open, completely undone, feeling something so pure and so overwhelming that you almost do not know what to do with it. These moments are rare. They cannot be manufactured or engineered through technical skill alone. They require a perfect alignment of writing, performance, music, timing, and emotional context that is genuinely difficult to achieve even once in an entire season of television, let alone in a single episode. Episode 2 of One Piece Live Action Season 2 contains one of these moments, and it involves Luffy. And if you have a heart beating inside your chest, it is going to destroy you completely in the most magnificent, most life-affirming way imaginable. Now, to understand why this moment lands with the extraordinary force that it does, you need to understand something about the first season and its relationship with Luffy's emotional depth. Because here is an honest truth that even the most enthusiastic supporters of Season 1 would likely acknowledge. While Iñaki Godoy delivered an enormously charming, enormously energetic performance as Luffy throughout the first season, the material he was given rarely asked him to operate in the deeper emotional registers that define Luffy's most powerful manga moments. Season 1 Luffy was joyful, he was determined, he was funny and stubborn and magnetically charismatic in all the ways that make the character so endlessly beloved. But the specific quality of emotional vulnerability, the particular kind of raw, unguarded feeling that surfaces in Luffy's greatest manga moments, that thing that makes you realize this apparently simple, apparently carefree boy carries something immeasurably profound inside him, that was largely absent from the first season, not because Godoy lacks the ability to access it, but because the season simply did not create the conditions for it to emerge. Episode 2 of Season 2 creates those conditions, and what emerges is something that will stay with you long after the episode ends. The scene itself, and we will be deliberately careful here about how much specific detail we reveal, because experiencing this moment without full foreknowledge is genuinely part of what makes it so devastating. Involves Luffy in a situation that the manga, at this point in its timeline, simply could not have constructed. This is one of the most fascinating and quietly revolutionary things about what the live action has the ability to do that the manga fundamentally cannot. Oda is a genius. The One Piece manga is one of the greatest long-form narratives ever constructed in any medium, but it is a story that was built chapter by chapter, year by year, without the complete architectural blueprint visible from the beginning. Oda himself has spoken about how certain connections, certain thematic resonances, certain emotional through lines only became fully clear to him as the story developed over decades. The live action, arriving now in 2024, with the full scope of the One Piece story available as context and reference, has a staggering advantage that the manga simply never had. It can look backward and forward simultaneously. It can take something from deep in the future of the story and bring it into conversation with something from the very beginning, creating a resonance, a full-circle emotional connection that is only possible because we now know where this journey ultimately leads. That is precisely what the Luffy scene in Episode 2 does. It takes knowledge, specific, profound, emotionally loaded knowledge about who Luffy is, where he is going, what he ultimately means to the people around him and to the world of One Piece as a whole, and it uses that knowledge to illuminate a moment in the early part of his journey with a light that the manga could never have shone on it because that light did not yet exist when Oda was writing these chapters. The result is a scene that operates on multiple levels simultaneously in a way that is genuinely breathtaking. On the surface, it is a scene about Luffy in the present moment of the story, about where he is right now, what he is feeling right now, what he is reaching toward right now, but underneath that surface, running like a deep current through every frame, is the full weight of everything we know about what this boy will become. Every sacrifice, every loss, every moment of devastating grief and soaring triumph that lies ahead of him on this impossible journey toward the title of King of the Pirates. And the collision of that future knowledge with this present moment creates an emotional charge so powerful, so overwhelming, that it is almost physically difficult to contain.